fun of large crowds, but I found out that I'd rather walk point in Vietnam for 2 weeks than get up here and talk, so bear with me if you will. I'll probably be breaking up like that film was. But I don't know if you noticed in that video, there was a black gentleman that I was tethered to that we jumped out of the plane with, and his name is Mike Elliott, and he's the gentleman that jumped with George Bush the 3 times that he jumped. So I felt quite secure jumping with him behind me, you know. But I'll jump back now to, I was born in Kankakee, Illinois, back in 1948, and I've always had this urge for some reason, as I followed my father. He was in a World War II Navy veteran, and my wife's father was also a World War II Navy veteran, but I always had this urge, I wanted to be a paratrooper. I just wanted to jump out of that plane. I had that big S on my chest like all young people have, you know, and I had that excitement going. So let me stop a second. I want to thank all the vets here for your service. Okay? How many Vietnam vets do we have? All right. Welcome home, guys. Okay? And, also, I want to thank Dale Perro here for the effort he put behind this project. My friend Steve Jennison from our building, Bob Wade from our building. I want to thank my wife for her encouragement with me. It was her birthday yesterday, so I know you guys look at her and you wonder, how did that guy? I looked much different when I was younger. But anyway, being a paratrooper, so I joined the military right out of high school. Vietnam was going pretty good then. It was 1967, July of 67. I went to Fort Leonard Wood for basic training. Beautiful place. From there I went down to Fort Gordon, Georgia, which is primarily a MP and communications, I believe, post. Well, everybody that went down there, that we were all airborne infantry volunteers, you know, the real smart guys. They sent us down to a little post on Fort Gordon called Camp Crockett, and there was little Quonset huts like you see in Gomer Pyle, MC, those Quonset huts. And we stayed there, and it was probably my hardest training I ever went through. They treated us like we were troopers then. We had to run everywhere. We had to do push-ups and pull-ups before lunch, and all kinds of calisthenics and so forth. Well, my infantry training was there. From there, I had qualified for special forces. You take a battery of tests in the military. And so I went to Fort Bragg to be in the special forces. And after I was there for a while, I decided that everything was going on pretty heavy then. That's when TET was going on. And my cousin and my best friend, who were Marines, and had gone to Vietnam. So here I am, I'm thinking, I'm gonna miss the war, you know? So I terminated Special Forces training. They sent me up to leave, and I went to Vietnam. I got there, excuse me. I got one other guest I gotta introduce. I have here with me tonight, stand up, Doc. This is Doc Warren, the medic that was there when I got wounded February 23rd. His lovely wife, Debbie. So I went off to Vietnam. I got to Vietnam July of 68. Was it July 68? No, May of 68. May of 68. And there was 19 of us, and we went to Cam Ranh Bay. There was a replacement company there, and then all 19 of us had jump wings sewed onto our uniforms, and we were all gung ho. We were going to the 101st Airborne. Rah rah, you know. We thought that's it. And so they issued us all our gear, the rifles and everything. And about 2 days before we left, they told us, oh, there's been a change. The 9th Infantry Division needs a lot of replacements. They took a lot of casualties during TET. So we moaned and groaned, and he says, well, don't worry, once you get down there, you go right into the orderly room, You talk to the first sergeant and tell him you want to transfer. You know what the answer was. I couldn't say it anyway unless I said it like that. But so that loaded our gear, and we were in the 9th Infantry Division. It was the second Brigade of the 9th Division that was part of the Mobile Riverine Force. And I don't know if anybody out there has heard of it. Has anybody heard of it? There's a Navy. Yeah, that's for it. We were, Doc heard of it. It was a group effort between the Navy and the Army. Way down in the Delta, way South Vietnam, we're on a base camp called Dong Tam. And out of Dong Tam, it was right along the Mekong River and some other rivers, I don't know the name, but these rivers were huge. And so they brought in these World War II troop transport ships. And believe it or not, my dad was on one of not the ship I was on, but one of those ships that her father, my wife's father, was also on one of the same type ships. I used to write back to my dad. I said, gee, I said, I joined the Army to become a paratrooper. They sent me down to Vietnam. I'm on a ship with the Navy, and I'm coming out of these little boats like a Marine. But these big troop transports were, troop carriers were on the river, and we'd be on the ships. The ships were quite nice. They were air conditioning, hot food, and so on and so forth. But once we were on the ships, then we would leave. We were transported up and down the various canals down in this South Vietnam. There were canals all over, water all over the place. And they were old World War II, LCM-6s. They were these devices that you saw probably in D-Day that the tanks came out of. They dropped the gate in front, and the tank would leave out of it. Well, they converted them into these troop transports. They were called armor troop carriers. We called them tangle boats. And they could carry up to a complement of about a platoon size element. And we were in there, and then they had a cover over the top that would shield you from the intense heat of the sun. And we'd get up in the morning, they'd put us on these ships, and we'd drive around for so long, and then they'd beach us here. We'd do our little mission thing, and we couldn't stay out that long on a mission because it was so wet, and we were always wet and muddy. And we would get what they called immersion foot. You know, when you're like in your bathtub for 2 hours, your foot looks like a grape, or a raisin, I should say. Well, that's how our feet would get, and after a while, they would get sores and get infections and so on and so forth. And there were leeches and mosquitoes and you name it. I think one of the worst things about where we were the elements, the heat, the water, the mosquitoes, the rain, the mud. We were continuously in mud. And so where am I going with this? But the longest I was ever out on a mission when we were down there on the boats was 19 days. And that was a long time sleeping on the ground. It was so far down south that the tide affected the water where we were. So you could go to sleep on this little area here, and you'd wake up and the water would be around you. So there wasn't a lot of fun with that, as Doc would attest to that. So, like you said, it was February. I made it 9 months there. I was there 9 months, and at that time I had an emergency leave. They sent me back home to the States for a month. I came back. I was in my 10th month, and I got this phone call. Oh no! We didn't have phones over there. We didn't have anything. Not like today, when we did. The only contact we had with the world was mail, and mail call was like, letters coming from heaven. It was great. But, hell, being 70. So we're out on this mission. And Doc was on the mission with me, of course, and this was February 26th. I'll tell you about this day. I talk in front of school children and various other organizations, and I tell the kids, I says, I'm not only a paratrooper, but I'm also a mind reader. Look at me, said, yeah, I can read your minds right now. And they'll lean forward, and I says, I know what you're saying. You're saying, what the hell happened to you? And so we go out on this mission. It was the first mission back when I came back from the States, and I had a replacement. My replacement was there because his name was Gleason, and he was from New York, Long Island. Don't hold that against him. But he was from Long Island, and we went out, and the gentleman's name was Gordon Gipner, was the guy that had been walking point for like 4 or 5 days. He'd been walking point, and he come up to me because I was his old squad leader, and he said, Baron, he says, I got a bad feeling. He says, I don't want to walk point today. And being back, I didn't want to ruffle anybody's feathers or whatever. So I said, don't worry, Gordon. You can walk behind me. And then this Gleason gentleman, who was my replacement, said, I'll walk in front of you, Baron. So he walked in front of me, and in front of those there was 2 Chuhoi guys that we couldn't trust anyway. But there were 2 Vietnamese guys that came over to our side. So they walked point, then it was Gleason, then it was me, then it was Gipner from Grand Rapids, Michigan. And behind him was our couple other guys, our lieutenant, radio operator, so on and so forth. So we were humping it pretty good because we had been ambushed early in the morning, and we were chasing these guys and following them. And I come over this ridge, and the last thing I remember was a whoo, just a terrible, loud, black noise, and it went black. Everything went completely black. And the next thing you know, I landed face down in the ground. Never felt a thing. Never felt anything. Didn't know anything was wrong. And Gleason comes running back. He was on the other side of the mine. And Gleason comes running back, and he says, oh my God, Baron, blankety, blankety, blank, they've blown your blankety, blankety, blank legs off. And I said, okay, roll me over, put tourniquets on it. Doc come up, help with the process. I didn't know it at the time, but Gipner, the guy that behind me that had the bad feeling, he was dead. Just not a drop of blood on him. Little pellets from the claymore just riddled his body, and he died. Volcom, a guy behind me, got hurt. Albright got hurt. My lieutenant took a couple pellets right between the eyes and went around his skull. And so, believe it or not, I was just so glad. I'd spent 10 months there just thinking about what was going to happen next. You go through a metamorphosis, if you will. You go over there and you still got that S on your chest, and you think you can do anything until you get in your first firefight, and you know they're trying to kill you. And then you go into a period where you become one hell of a soldier. You're all fired up, you know exactly what to do, where to go, and who to tell where to go, and all this. And then towards the end of your career, into your tour, which is 12 months, you start getting scared again. I haven't gotten hurt yet. I don't know. Something's going to happen. So I was probably in that stage there. So after I got hurt and I knew what had happened, I never passed out. Doc came up and gave me a fake shot of morphine. He didn't have any morphine. I asked for morphine, and Doc grabbed me and he did something, and he said, there, so I started feeling better, and, I was just so glad to be alive. I just wanted to get into the base camp, 9th Division's base camp, and get in that operating room, and I wanted him to put me to sleep. But I knew I was going home. I could get by this. So it took me back to Dong Tam. I got sent to Japan after a period of time. In Dong Tam, the mine took my legs off below the knees, traumatically. Then in Dong Tam, they took my legs off, took my legs off above my knees because they were so tore up. So I go to Japan, and the Marine Corps, who's a Marine right there? There's the Marine. My cousin, Terry LaRoche, who was born 13 days before me, and I lived with my senior year in high school. He was in the Marine Corps. He was over there up in Da Nang, and the Red Cross got him and let him come to Japan to see me. Yeah, wow, talk about choppy, like that movie. But, so if you want to donate money besides to veterans, do it to the Red Cross, they're a great organization. So I was at Japan for 4 or 5 days, I don't know what it was, but I was just getting strong enough to go back home. So they sent me back home, and I'm near Chicago. They said they're gonna send you to the closest place they can to your hometown, so you'll have that support. So I wind up in Washington, D.C. at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. It was the best thing that could have happened to me. They had all the help there. We were an award of they were all amputees. So I had that, unlike other guys that would come from the jungle, come home from Vietnam, from the jungle, and go right to the streets, without any debriefing, without any coming down. I had 10 months that I was in Walter Reed, where talking with birds of a feather, we were there together sharing everything. So I'm pretty good that way, I'm not, believe it or not, I'm not bitter. I don't feel sorry for myself. If I tell you that God's truth, if I could do it again, I'd do it again. And made so many friends. We got Doc here, we got 6 or 7 other guys that were there that day. We meet at least every 2 years. You talk about bands of brothers, we are forever, so I'm so glad Doc could be here tonight. But I came home then, married the prettiest girl in high school. Once again, I was younger. I didn't look like this all the time. And we have 3 daughters. Went to the University of Illinois, played wheelchair basketball and football, and got a degree in accounting. Came back and worked for quite a while, for 30-some years. And my last job was, I was the adjutant at the Illinois Veterans Home in Manteno, which was a perfect job for me. It was a 340-bed skilled nursing care home that took care of nothing but wartime vets. So it was a great job. Decided to retire. So, got into politics a little bit. I don't want to talk about that.
Easy now.
I will not be on the Supreme Court. But and we came down here, and now we're with you people. So good people. And this is something else. Do you have any questions? I know you want to see the film again. Bob.
Tell the folks about your buddies going across the street to the bar.
Oh, shoot. When we were at Walter Reed, you're getting better. You're not laying there in bed, wired up in that. But so we would go across the street. It was called the Walter Reed Inn. Me and my buddy from Springfield, Illinois, Richardson, and we took this guy. His name was Schultz. He actually worked pretty high up in the VFW as I forget what it was, but he was pretty high up in the VFW. So I'm a double amputee. Bill's a double amputee, and this guy named Schultz, Bill Schultz, whatever his first name was, he had a knee, and we go over there and we get to drinking. I don't drink anymore. This might tell you why, but we get over there drinking, and Senator Dirkson's wife. Senator Dirkson was Walter Reed at the time, and he died when we were there. But anyway, his wife was there, and we drink, and so we always race back to the ward. See, we'd be the first one back to the ward. Always competition. And you come out of Walter Reed Inn, and it wasn't like ADA today, where there's a ramp on every corner or anything like this. There's a curve about this big. So Bill and I, we flip ourselves up. You're quite proficient in this thing. We flip ourselves up, bounce down, and take off, and we're going like hell. It's a little ways away, and we just think, "Where's Schultz? Where's Schultz?" So we stop and look back, and here's an ambulance over there. He had went to jump out, and he missed it, and he fell down, and he broke his femur. So he laid there in the ward for how long? You know how they put the pin in it, and they put a pin in the femur to hold it straight. He was laid up in bed. Is that what you're talking about, Bob? Oh, we gave it to him every once in a while. But There was fun times as well, and another thing I wanna tell you, that I've been wanted to tell you, when I was there, 12 of my friends didn't make it, okay? But now here's this, 6 died by the enemy, 6 drowned. So, there's a hazard all around the corners, but, any other questions? All right, you back there. Oh, they did that hand up.
How's the golf lessons going?
Huh?
How's the golf lessons?
I've had 2 and I need more. But I can't thank the veterans group here enough, or Dale enough for what this happened. This is out of this world, I'll tell you. So,
Have you driven it yet?
yeah, I have, you see the dent in the side?